Hi there, I'm Birgit O'Connor and welcome to my studio. Today I wanted to give you a very simple little exercise that you can practice talking about brushes, different types of papers, the amount of pressure on the brush, and keeping things simple. So I hope you enjoy this, so let's get started.
This is when I started to try to loosen up. What I like are these lines here, and this is what I like about watercolor, that we get those jeweled effects. And I know there's some name, but I don't really know the name of this, where we have the watercolor accumulating along the edges. And in general, for this type of painting, that works beautifully, but if we're trying to do a big flower, we don't want that because too much color along that edge can make those really thick, hard lines. But here, this works perfectly. And this is not one of my favorite paintings just because I think it's kind of blocky, because I didn't think about losing any edges. There are a lot of brush strokes here. This is 140-pound paper. It's the hot press. It's going to give me more blooms on here, but I didn't think about tilting it. So if I tilt it, then I'm going to get more blooms, something like this, which actually makes things much more interesting for this type of painting style. Now, using this idea right there, this is 140 or 300-pound actually, Arches paper, and because that's all I was working with at this time. I was working with the 300-pound cold press paper for all my florals, and here I'm trying to be loose, but I couldn't make it happen. I just didn't know how to let go. But what I do like about this is that it's much smoother, and it has some very interesting techniques. So, you know, there's no wrong way to do it. It's whatever you like. This is very nice and loose. This is more contained, and I could build this up and work with my color. This is just a scrap piece of 300-pound paper. Again, I was trying to figure this out, and I thought, why can't I lose the edges or get the effect that I wanted? Well, it's going to soak into the paper a little differently. With the hot press paper, it's going to sit more on top. So you have a longer time to create these blooms. There's lots of things, but I can go back in and play with this. This is on hot pressed paper. And again, I wasn't very loose here because I was trying to smooth everything out, just like I would do with my florals. But what I do have is a highlight here. And since it's a hot pressed paper, sometimes it can be more difficult to get the depth that I want. So I was experimenting with some different colors. I think I had indigo in here and quinacridone gold, and you know, just playing with it a little differently. So it's in between the loose and the more controlled painting. Now, why I have this is that I want you to know about the values. You can see that this is one color here, and I just had, actually, let's turn it this way. If I have one color here and then continue to add water to it, then I'm going to get a lighter value. If I come in very dark, which we can see in some of my paintings, like I was trying to get the shadow very dark, then it can be almost too thick, which we don't necessarily want. So we're going to work with the amount of water in our watercolor blend and the application on the surface. We're going to encourage blooms like that, and to do that, have your paper at a slight tilt. That's always a lot of fun. This here is just showing you when we glaze color on top of it, or if we have a brush stroke. This is nice, you know, because a lot of times people are always trying to soften everything. We don't necessarily want to soften everything. And here, with the synthetic brush, we'll run out of water and color pretty quickly. With a blend brush, it's going to hold more water and color for a longer period of time, but then you're going to run out of it. And then the synthetic brush, you're going to get more control. The blend brush, and a bit more water holding ability. I'm trying to grab my brushes here. So if I'm trying to be loose and I'm using a synthetic brush, that's not going to work really well. If I use a blend brush and do this, I can adjust it by the amount of pressure that I apply to the brush. If I want it to be really wet and loose, then I would use a natural brush, something like that, or one of these, a silver, black velvet silver brush, or one of these. Now, when I do something like that, it's going to use a lot of water. And if I'm using a lot of water, I have to be careful too, because otherwise it can just be one big wet mess. And so we need to control it. That means I'm going to dip in my rinse bucket, take it to the edge, tap it on the towel, depending on what I'm trying to get. And if I want to encourage those blooms where we don't usually want them, I'm going to again have my paper at a slight tilt. So usually I'd go through all of this and show you, but I think that this is just fine, and I think that gives you enough for right now on that, because then we can start working on our brush strokes and losing an edge. So for that, I'm going to take some Canson paper, just scrap paper, that's all we need. In fact, I can use the back of this. This is the same paper. Why this is important is I need you to practice the amount of pressure you apply and not have it so drawn on, because if we're applying the same amount of pressure or using a synthetic brush, then you're going to be very detailed, and that'll be fine if you want a more realistic painting. But if you want it more painterly, we're going to adjust the amount of pressure on the brush. But here, we're just going to play with the brush stroke. Now, if I go from here and go directly here, that's really thick and pasty, and that's usually what we do when we're a kid. You know, we go from here, there, there. That's not going to give us what we want. We'll have a stronger color intensity, but for this type of painting, the looser style, that's not going to really work well for us. Okay, so I'm just adding a bit more water into this, and then I'm going to play with it. Now, I'm going to hold it higher up the handle like here, allow the very tip to touch the paper, and change the type of brush stroke. You know, the amount of pressure, sorry about that. I'd like you to do this with me. And actually, by you doing it with me, it's going to stop you from thinking too much. So if we just draw a line like that, that's pretty typical. We don't want that. We're going to change the amount of pressure. Press and lift. Try to get a wiggle in your wrist. If you have maybe a squirrel brush, try that. Now, for years, I thought this type of brush was not going to work. I don't know why anybody would paint with this brush. This is what I was thinking, because it's way too soft. And when I was trying to paint my florals, this wasn't going to work because I could not get the control that I wanted. But what works beautifully for this style of painting is that it holds so much water that I can let the very tip touch right there. I can press. We're basically doing the same thing, but it holds a lot more water. Just get that wrist moving a little bit. You cannot really paint a controlled flower with this brush. We're just kind of warming up here. So here I'm going to try a little sword brush. This is fun too. Okay, the sword brush is long. It has a funny tip to it. I can go wide like that, and I can just twist my wrist and get a different stroke. Now that we don't really need this for the pears, but it's just fun to play with the amount of pressure on the brush and the size. Okay, I'm going to show you how we're going to lose an edge. Now, a lot of you have been with me for quite a while, so you already know this, but if you haven't done this, to lose an edge, let's say we have our stroke there, then I would come in with a number 30, get it wet, remove some of the extra water, depending on how far I want that edge to travel, and then I'm just going to soften the very edge. This is a real standard, important thing right here. Now, if I go from here and go there, I'm going to add too much water, and it can easily bloom to the edge, and it can also carry that color to the edge of that brush stroke. But if I want to control it, I'm going from my rinse bucket, remove the extra water, tap it on the towel, and bring that edge all the way down. So you'll practice this as we continue.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. If you're interested in more of these lessons, don't forget to subscribe. And until next time, have fun and happy painting.